Commander Jake Sullivan stared at the screens in front of him and felt his blood turn cold. The numbers did not make sense. The energy readings were off the charts and getting stronger every minute. He had been watching space for 12 years from the Aegis Prime Station and had never seen anything like this. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez rushed over to his station with her tablet in hand. Her face was white as paper and her hands were shaking. She had been monitoring the deep space sensors. When the first signals appeared 3 hours ago, what started as tiny blips on the edge of their detection range had grown into something that made her stomach twist with fear. The signals were not natural. They were not from any human ship or probe. They were something else entirely, and they were getting closer to Earth with each passing moment. Amy had run every test she could think of and checked all the equipment twice. The readings were real and they were terrifying. Jake took the tablet from Amy and looked at the data. His military training kicked in and he forced himself to stay calm. The objects were massive and moving faster than anything humans had ever built. They were still days away from Earth, but at their current speed they would arrive soon. He needed to contact Earth Command immediately. The communication system crackled to life as Jake sent an emergency signal to the planet below. Within minutes, he was connected to Admiral Ryan Brooks at the Pentagon. The Admiral listened carefully as Jake explained what they were seeing. His voice was steady, but Jake could hear the concern underneath. President Lisa Carter was pulled from a cabinet meeting and brought to the Situation Room. She had dealt with many crises during her time in office, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The possibility of contact with alien life had always been theoretical. Now it was happening, and she had to make decisions that could affect all of humanity. The alien ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the solar system with a flash of light that could be seen from Earth. There were dozens of them, and each one was larger than the biggest human battleship. They were sleek and beautiful in a way that was completely alien. Their hulls seemed to be made of some kind of crystal that reflected starlight in patterns that hurt to look at. Dr. Helen Park was in her lab at the university when the first images came through. As one of the world's leading experts on the possibility of alien life, she had dreamed of this moment her entire career. But looking at the ships on her screen, she felt only dread. These were not explorers or scientists. These were warships. The alien fleet arranged itself in a perfect formation and began moving toward Earth. They made no attempt to hide their approach or their intentions. Every radio telescope and deep space sensor on the planet was focused on them now. The world held its breath and waited. Then the message came. It arrived on every communication frequency at once and was broadcast in perfect English. The voice was cold and mechanical with no emotion at all. It spoke words that would change everything for humanity forever. The Caliph Empire had found Earth. High Overlord Zethkar spoke for his people, and his message was simple. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender completely, or they would all be destroyed. Earth was now claimed as property of the Empire, and humans would serve as workers on distant worlds. Resistance was pointless and would only bring pain. The message played over and over on every television and radio station on Earth. Panic spread through the cities as people tried to understand what was happening. Some refused to believe it was real. Others packed their cars and tried to flee to places where they thought they might be safe. Most just stood and stared at their screens in shock. President Carter called an emergency session of the United Nations. World leaders gathered in New York to discuss their response. Some wanted to negotiate. Others demanded that they fight. A few suggested immediate surrender to save lives. The debate went on for hours while the alien fleet grew closer. Admiral Brooks worked with his staff to assess Earth's military capabilities. The numbers were not good. Humanity had never built weapons designed to fight in space against an enemy like this. Their best ships were tiny compared to the alien vessels. Their most powerful weapons were nuclear missiles that might not even scratch the enemy hulls. Dr. Park studied the alien communication and found something disturbing. She accessed old radio signals from deep space and discovered that similar messages had been sent before. The Caliph had done this many times to other worlds. They had a system, and they were very good at it. No species had ever successfully fought Them off. As the 72-hour deadline approached, Earth's leaders made their choice. They would not surrender. They would fight even if it meant the end of everything. The message was sent back to the alien fleet. Humanity rejected the ultimatum and prepared for war. High Overlord Zethkar received the human response aboard his flagship. He was not surprised. Most species chose to fight at first. It made no difference. The Caliph had conquered 847 worlds, and Earth would be number 848. The invasion would begin as soon as the deadline passed. The 72 hours passed like a nightmare that would not end. When the deadline came, the alien response was swift and terrible. The Caliph fleet moved toward Earth and began their attack without warning or mercy. The war for humanity's survival had begun. General Marcus Stone watched from his command bunker deep under the Colorado Mountains as the first reports came in. The aliens had targeted every major military base on the planet at the same time. Their weapons were beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Entire installations simply vanished in flashes of purple light. Captain Lucy Harper was leading her squadron of F-99 Raptors over New York when the attack began. She saw the alien dreadnought descend through the clouds like a falling mountain. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Her squadron was the last line of defense for 8 million people, and she knew they were going to die. The alien ship's shields absorbed their missiles like raindrops hitting a windshield. Lucy ordered her pilots to switch to guns and make strafing runs along the hull. They managed to scratch the crystal surface before the ship's defensive systems turned them all into burning debris. Lucy's last thought was that she hoped someone would remember they had tried. The alien ground forces began landing 6 hours after the orbital bombardment started. Their transport ships touched down in major cities around the world and opened to release creatures that looked like nightmares come to life. They stood 8 feet tall on 4 legs and had 4 arms that ended in claws designed for killing. Their natural armor could stop rifle bullets, and their weapons fired plasma that melted steel. Dr. Kevin Wright was trapped in his laboratory at the Pentagon when the aliens breached the building. He hid under his desk and watched through a crack in the door as the creatures moved through the hallways. They were efficient and deadly, but something about them seemed wrong. They moved in perfect formation and never deviated from their planned routes. It was like watching machines pretend to be alive. Colonel Beth Morgan had managed to escape from her base before it was destroyed. She gathered the survivors in an abandoned warehouse and tried to make sense of what Kevin was telling her. The aliens were too organized and too predictable. Real soldiers would have checked every room and corner, but these things only went where they were programmed to go. The world's governments tried to coordinate a response, but most of their communication systems had been destroyed in the first wave. Nuclear weapons were launched at the alien ships, but their shields turned the warheads into harmless fireworks. Earth's armies fought bravely, but they were like children throwing rocks at tanks. Mayor Tony Clark of Detroit found himself leading a group of refugees through the city's old subway tunnels. The underground passages had been abandoned for years, but now they offered the only safe passage through the war zone above. Tony had been a politician his whole life, but now he was learning to be a warrior. The aliens established processing centers in every major city. Humans were rounded up by the thousands and sorted like cattle. The young and strong were marked for transport to slave worlds. The old and weak were simply eliminated. Children were separated from their parents and loaded onto ships bound for alien worlds where they would be raised as workers. Dr. Helen Park was captured during the fall of Washington, but managed to escape during a resistance attack on her transport convoy. She joined a group of survivors hiding in the ruins of the Smithsonian Museum. Surrounded by the broken remains of human history, she began to study alien equipment left behind by dead soldiers. The technology was incredible, but it all seemed to follow the same basic patterns. Every weapon worked the same way. Every piece of armor had identical weak points. Every vehicle used the same control system. It was as if the entire alien army had been built from a single blueprint with no room for variation or improvement. Amy Rodriguez had survived the destruction of Aegis. Prime by hiding in an escape pod for 3 days. When she finally made it back to Earth, she found a world transformed into hell. The skies were filled with alien ships and the cities burned with fires that would not go out. But she also found something else. She found humans who refused to give up. Jake Sullivan had made it to the underground command center where General Stone was trying to coordinate what was left of Earth's military forces. The aliens controlled the skies and most of the surface, but they had not found all of the hidden bunkers and tunnels. Small groups of human fighters were already beginning to strike back. The resistance was born in those first terrible weeks. It started with soldiers who had lost their units and civilians who had lost their families. They came together in basements and sewers and abandoned buildings. They had no plan and few weapons, but they had something the aliens did not understand. They had rage. Captain Steve Miller had been a Navy SEAL before the invasion. Now he was teaching teenagers how to make bombs from household chemicals and how to kill aliens with kitchen knives. His students were quick learners because they had seen what happened to people who were taken to the processing centers. Death was better than slavery. The aliens began to face attacks they had not expected. Humans would appear from nowhere and strike at supply convoys or communication posts, then vanish back into the ruins. The attacks did little real damage, but they forced the aliens to spread their forces thinner to guard against them. High Overlord Zethkar was annoyed by the continued resistance. Most species surrendered completely within days of the initial assault. These humans seemed determined to make things difficult even though they had no hope of victory. He ordered his commanders to increase the pace of processing and to eliminate any humans who could not be useful as workers. The order came too late. Humanity had already begun to adapt and learn. They were studying their enemies and finding weaknesses. They were building weapons from scrap metal and explosives from cleaning supplies. Most importantly, they were discovering that the aliens were not as invincible as they seemed. The real war was just beginning. 3 months had passed since the invasion began, and Earth looked like a different world. The great cities lay in ruins while massive alien structures rose from the rubble. Mining operations scarred the landscape as the Caliphs stripped away resources they needed for their empire. Billions of humans had vanished into the holds of transport ships bound for distant slave worlds. Sarah Mitchell crouched in the darkness of an abandoned subway tunnel beneath Chicago and listened to the sounds of alien patrols moving overhead. She had been a Marine sergeant before the invasion, and now she led 30 fighters who called themselves the Underground. They lived like rats in the tunnels and sewers, but they were still free and still fighting. The aliens avoided certain areas of the city, and Sarah had figured out why. Old industrial zones with heavy electrical equipment created interference that disrupted their communication systems and targeting computers. The humans had learned to use these dead zones as sanctuaries, where they could move without being detected by alien sensors. Engineer Carlos Viga worked by candlelight in a hidden workshop beneath the ruins of a factory. He was building bombs from pieces of alien technology salvaged from battlefields. The work was dangerous because alien power cells were unstable and prone to exploding without warning. Carlos had lost 2 fingers learning how to handle them safely, but his weapons could now damage alien patrol units. The resistance had adopted hit-and-run tactics that drove the aliens crazy with frustration. Small teams would strike at supply convoys or communication relays, then disappear into the urban maze before reinforcements could arrive. The aliens would search for hours but find nothing except empty buildings and silent streets. Dr. Helen Park had set up a laboratory in the basement of a destroyed hospital where she studied captured alien equipment. Her biggest breakthrough came when she discovered that the aliens used quantum-entangled communication networks to coordinate their forces. Every alien soldier and vehicle was connected to a central command system that told them what to do and when to do it. The discovery explained why the aliens moved in such predictable patterns. They were not really thinking for themselves, but following orders transmitted from their command ships. If the communication network could be disrupted, the entire alien force would lose coordination and become vulnerable to attack. Intelligence Operative Danny Torres had managed to infiltrate one of the alien processing centers by disguising himself as a captured human. What he learned there made his blood run cold. The aliens planned to reduce Earth's population to 100 million slaves within 2 years. Everyone else would be killed as excess biological waste that consumed too many resources. The news spread through the resistance networks and hardened human resolve like nothing else could have. People who had been hiding and hoping for rescue realized that there would be no mercy and no negotiation. The choice was simple: fight or die. Most chose to fight. Captain Steve Miller had established training camps in remote wilderness areas where civilians learned to become guerrilla fighters. His instructors were former soldiers who taught everything from making improvised explosives to conducting ambush attacks. The camps graduated dozens of new fighters every week. As the resistance grew stronger, the aliens began to realize they were facing something they had never encountered before. Other species had either surrendered quickly or been easily crushed by superior firepower. These humans seemed to get more determined with each defeat and more creative with each setback. They were adapting faster than the Caliph could respond. Mayor Tony Clark had transformed Detroit's abandoned subway system into an underground city where thousands of refugees lived and worked. They had workshops for making weapons and hospitals for treating wounded fighters. Children too young to fight served as messengers and scouts. Everyone contributed to the war effort in whatever way they could. The resistance developed its own communication network using old technology the aliens could not easily monitor. Ham radio operators sent coded messages across continents while motorcycle couriers carried intelligence between cells. The system was slow and limited, but it allowed coordination of attacks. Across multiple time zones, Amy Rodriguez had become an expert at intercepting alien communications. She discovered that the Caliph were becoming increasingly frustrated with their inability to completely pacify Earth. Other conquered worlds had been fully processed within months, but the human resistance was actually growing stronger over time. General Stone coordinated the resistance from his underground command center, but the real leadership came from people like Sarah and Tony and Steve, who were fighting on the front lines every day. They understood their enemy better than any general because they faced them in close combat. Where mistakes meant death, the aliens tried new tactics to break human morale. When resistance fighters destroyed a mining facility in Nevada, the Caliph executed 10,000 civilians as punishment. Instead of frightening people into submission, the massacre triggered widespread uprisings as formerly passive humans joined the resistance in massive numbers. Dr. Kevin Wright continued studying alien behavior patterns and made disturbing discoveries about their nature. The Caliph were not a natural species, but genetically engineered creatures bred for specific roles within their empire. They had been designed to follow orders without question and lacked the individual creativity that made humans so unpredictable. The resistance began using the aliens' rigid thinking against them. They would set traps that relied on the aliens following their programmed responses even when those responses led them into danger. Fake supply convoys would lure alien patrols into ambush. False communications would send alien units to locations where human fighters were waiting. Colonel Beth Morgan organized the Phoenix network, which connected resistance cells across North America. She used everything from carrier pigeons to coded newspaper advertisements to maintain contact between groups. The network allowed coordinated strikes that hit multiple targets simultaneously and kept the aliens guessing about where the next attack would come. Engineer Kelly Adams worked in a hidden facility beneath the ruins of NASA's Johnson Space Center, where she was building humanity's first spacecraft capable of reaching orbit. The ship was crude compared to alien technology, but it was built from salvaged materials and powered by captured alien energy cells. She called it the Defiance. The aliens were learning that conquering humans was very different from conquering other species. Every victory came at a cost, and every defeat made the humans more dangerous. The Caliph had expected to control Earth within months, but instead found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. High Overlord Seth Carr reviewed reports from his commanders and felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt, the human resistance should have been crushed by now, but instead it was becoming a serious threat to his operations on Earth. For the first time in his long career, he began to wonder if the Caliph might actually lose a conquest. 8 months after the invasion began, the Caliph were discovering that humans were unlike any species they had ever tried to conquer. The resistance was not weakening as expected, but growing stronger and more organized with each passing week. What had started as scattered groups of survivors had evolved into a coordinated underground army that struck at alien targets across the globe. Dr. Janet Hayes worked in a secret laboratory hidden beneath the ruins of Harvard Medical School where she studied captured alien specimens. Her research had revealed disturbing truths about the Caliph that explained their strengths and weaknesses. They were not natural beings, but artificial creatures engineered by some unknown master race for the specific purpose of conquest and control. Each Caliph was bred for a particular role within their military hierarchy and could not function outside that role. Warriors could only fight. Engineers could only build. Commanders could only give orders. None of them possessed the flexibility and creativity that allowed humans to adapt to changing circumstances or think of new solutions to old problems. This genetic limitation explained why alien tactics remained rigid and predictable, even when they clearly were not working. The Caliph literally could not change their approach because they had been designed to follow specific behavioral patterns. Humans, on the other hand, seemed to thrive on unpredictability and chaos. Resistance leader Robert Price had established the Phoenix Network as a continent-spanning communication system that connected cells from Alaska to Mexico. The network used old-fashioned technology that the aliens struggled to detect or intercept. Ham radio operators broadcast coded messages while motorcycle couriers carried intelligence through territories too dangerous for electronic communication. The network allowed resistance fighters to coordinate attacks across multiple time zones and share information about alien movements and weaknesses. When a cell in California discovered that alien patrols avoided areas with high electromagnetic interference, the information spread to fighters around the world within hours. Sarah Mitchell led her Chicago cell in increasingly bold attacks against alien installations. Her fighters had learned to move through the city's extensive tunnel system like ghosts emerging from the earth to strike and vanish again. They had become so effective that the aliens had stopped sending small patrols into certain areas and now only moved in large, heavily armed groups. The aliens responded to growing resistance with increasingly brutal reprisals, hoping to break human morale. When fighters destroyed a processing center in Texas, the Caliph rounded up every human within 50 miles and executed them publicly. The massacre was broadcast on captured television networks. As a warning to anyone considering rebellion, the strategy backfired completely. Instead of frightening people into submission, the executions triggered massive uprisings in cities that had been relatively quiet. Millions of humans who had been trying to survive by keeping their heads down suddenly joined the resistance as they realized that cooperation would not save them from alien brutality. Engineer Kelly Adams completed work on her prototype spacecraft in the hidden facility beneath Johnson Space Center. The Defiance was built from salvaged materials and alien technology stolen from crash sites. It was ugly and crude, but it could reach low Earth orbit, and more importantly, it was invisible to alien sensors because it used human stealth technology. The ship's first mission was a suicide run against an orbital processing station where captured humans were being prepared for transport to slave worlds. Kelly piloted the craft herself because she was the only person who understood its improvised systems well enough to fly it in combat. She knew she would probably die, but the mission was too important to trust to anyone else. The attack succeeded beyond all expectations. The Defiance penetrated the station's defenses and delivered a nuclear warhead directly to its core. The explosion destroyed the facility and freed thousands of prisoners who had been scheduled for transport the next day. More importantly, it proved that humans could take the fight beyond Earth's atmosphere. Captain Steve Miller's training camps were producing hundreds of new fighters every month as civilians learned guerrilla warfare techniques. His instructors taught everything from urban combat to demolitions using textbooks, written in blood and paid for with the lives of volunteers who tested new tactics. Against alien patrols, the camps were hidden in remote areas where alien surveillance was limited, but they still faced constant danger from hunting parties searching for resistance bases. Miller moved his operations frequently and used decoy camps to confuse alien intelligence. Half the camps were empty buildings designed to waste alien time and resources. Dr. Kevin Wright continued his analysis of alien behavior and made breakthrough discoveries about their command structure. The Caliph operated under a strict hierarchy, where orders flowed downward through quantum communication networks. Lower-ranking aliens could not act independently or make decisions outside their programming. This rigid structure was simultaneously their greatest strength and their fatal weakness. It allowed perfect coordination of massive forces across interstellar distances, but it also meant that disrupting communications would paralyze entire armies. Wright began working with resistance engineers to develop weapons that could jam or destroy alien communication systems. Amy Rodriguez had intercepted enough alien communications to understand their long-term strategy for Earth. The planet was being converted into a resource extraction facility that would strip mine the continents and process the oceans for rare elements needed by the Caliph Empire. Humans were viewed as biological resources to be harvested and utilized. Like any other raw material, the aliens planned to maintain a population of 100 million humans as workers and eliminate the rest as wasteful consumers of resources. The timeline called for completing this population reduction within the next year, which meant the pace of processing would accelerate dramatically in the coming months. General Stone coordinated resistance activities from his underground command center, but the real war was being fought by small cells led by people like Sarah and Tony and Robert. They understood their enemy in ways that no military academy could teach because they faced alien soldiers in close combat. Where theory meant nothing and survival depended on practical knowledge, the resistance had learned to exploit alien weaknesses with devastating effectiveness. Electromagnetic pulse weapons disabled alien equipment. Attacks on communication relays isolated alien units from their command network. Ambushs in areas with heavy interference prevented aliens from calling for support or coordinating their response. Mayor Tony Clark's underground city in Detroit had become a model for resistance bases around the world. The complex housed thousands of refugees and included workshops for manufacturing weapons, hospitals for treating wounded fighters, and schools where children learned skills they would need to survive in the new world. Engineer Carlos Vega had perfected techniques for converting alien power cells into improvised, explosive devices that could destroy even heavily armored alien vehicles. His workshops produced hundreds of bombs every week using materials salvaged from battlefields and abandoned alien equipment. High Overlord Zethkar reviewed reports from Earth with growing concern. The human resistance should have been crushed months ago, but instead it was becoming a serious threat to Caliph operations throughout the solar system. His commanders were requesting reinforcements and extended timelines for completing the conquest. The High Command was growing impatient with the delays. On Earth, other worlds were being conquered on schedule while the primitive humans continued to cause problems that should not exist. Zethkar knew that his reputation and possibly his life depended on finding a solution to the human problem before his superiors lost patience completely. 15 months after the invasion began, humanity achieved something that had never happened in the 847 previous Caliph conquests. They won a major battle against their alien oppressors and captured vital intelligence. That would change the course of the war. Commander Julia Freeman led the coordinated assault on the primary Caliph command center hidden beneath the Antarctic ice sheet. The facility controlled alien operations across the southern hemisphere, and its capture had required months of planning and preparation. Freeman commanded 500 resistance fighters, drawn from cells around the world who had volunteered for what everyone assumed would be a suicide mission. The attack began with simultaneous strikes on alien communication relays across 3 continents to prevent the command center from calling for reinforcements. Sarah Mitchell's Chicago fighters hit targets in the Midwest while Tony Clark's Detroit Underground struck installations around the Great Lakes. Similar attacks occurred in Europe and Asia as the global resistance coordinated its most ambitious operation. The Antarctic facility was protected by massive energy shields and defended by elite Caliph warriors, but the humans had advantages their enemies did not expect. They had learned to move through electromagnetic dead zones where alien sensors failed and to use improvised weapons that did not register on Caliph threat assessment systems. Carlos Vega had developed electromagnetic pulse grenades specifically for the mission using alien power cells modified with human electronics. The weapons disabled alien equipment without triggering their automated defense systems. Kelly Adams provided air support with 3 Defiance-class fighters built in secret workshops using salvaged alien technology. The battle lasted 18 hours and cost the lives of 200 human fighters, but when it ended, the command center was in human hands. More importantly, the facility's quantum communication hub was intact along with massive databases containing intelligence about Caliph operations throughout the galaxy. Dr. Kevin Wright led the team that analyzed the captured data, and what they found changed everything. The entire Caliph fleet operated through a centralized artificial intelligence system located aboard their flagship Dominion in high Earth orbit. Every alien ship and ground unit received orders from this master computer through quantum entangled communication networks. The AI controlled everything from tactical decisions to supply logistics and even individual soldier behavior. Destroying the central computer would not just disrupt communications, but would completely paralyze the entire invasion force. However, the Dominion was heavily defended and protected by the most advanced shields in the Caliph fleet. Pilot Nick Johnson volunteered for the mission even though everyone knew it was suicide. The plan required flying a modified Defiance fighter loaded with a prototype quantum disruptor device directly into the Dominion's hull and detonating the weapon inside the ship's core systems. The chances of survival were 0, but Johnson accepted without hesitation. The quantum disruptor had been built by Amy Rodriguez and Dr. Helen Park, using principles discovered in the captured Antarctic database. The device would create a feedback loop in the alien communication network that should theoretically crash their AI system. However, it had never been tested and might not work at all. Preparations for the mission required the largest coordinated resistance operation in history. Every cell on Earth launched simultaneous attacks to draw alien attention away from the orbital approach route. Cities that had been quiet for months suddenly erupted in rebellion as millions of humans took to the streets with improvised weapons. The diversionary attacks were led by veteran fighters like Steve Miller and Robert Price, who coordinated strikes across 6 continents. The aliens found themselves fighting on 1,000 fronts simultaneously. As humans emerged from hiding places they had occupied for over a year, Sarah Mitchell led her fighters out of the Chicago tunnels for the first time since the invasion began, and attacked alien installations across the city. Her people fought with desperate courage, knowing that they were probably going to die, but determined to give Nick Johnson the best possible chance of reaching his target. The global uprising caught the Caliph completely off guard. Their rigid command structure could not adapt quickly enough to respond to attacks coming from every direction at once. Units that had been stationed in secure areas suddenly found themselves surrounded by human fighters who seemed to materialize from nowhere. Nick Johnson launched from a hidden base in Nevada, flying a Defiance fighter that had been stripped of everything except engines and the quantum disruptor. He followed a carefully planned route through the debris field left by earlier space battles, using the wreckage to mask his approach from alien sensors. The flight to the Dominion took 6 hours, during which Johnson listened to radio reports of the battles raging on Earth below. Human fighters were dying by the thousands to create the diversion he needed, but their sacrifice was giving him the only chance anyone would have to end the war. The Dominion was a crystalline mountain floating in space surrounded by smaller escort vessels and defensive platforms. Johnson had studied the ship's design for weeks and knew exactly where he needed to go. The central AI core was located deep inside the vessel behind multiple layers of armor and energy shields. Johnson's fighter penetrated the outer defenses by hiding in the shadow of a destroyed human battleship that had been floating in the debris field since the first days of the war. He used the wreckage as cover until he was close enough to make his final attack run directly at the flagship's hull. The Defiance's crude stealth systems failed as soon as he began his attack run, but by then it was too late for the aliens to stop him. Johnson flew straight into the Dominion's hangar bay and detonated the quantum disruptor before alien security forces could react. The explosion tore through the ship's quantum communication hub and created exactly the feedback loop that Amy and Helen had predicted. Instead of just destroying the Dominion, the weapon sent cascading system failures through the entire Calith fleet. Every alien ship in the solar system began shutting down as their AI systems crashed. Ground-based alien forces suddenly found themselves cut off from orbital support and unable to coordinate with each other. The rigid hierarchy that had been their strength became their downfall as individual units proved incapable of independent action when their communication links failed. Human resistance fighters who had been hiding in tunnels and ruins for over a year suddenly found themselves facing confused and disorganized enemies. The hunters had become the hunted as humans emerged from their underground sanctuaries to begin the final phase of their war for freedom. The tide of war had turned in humanity's favor, but the hardest fighting was still ahead. The aliens might be crippled, but they were far from defeated, and humans had learned never to underestimate an enemy's capacity for violence when faced with extinction. 18 months after the invasion began, the impossible had happened. The Calith Empire that had conquered 847 worlds without a single defeat lay broken and helpless before the savage fury of human resistance. Their mighty fleet drifted powerless in Earth's orbit while their ground forces found themselves isolated and hunted by the very creatures they had planned to enslave. General Marcus Stone emerged from his underground command bunker for the first time since the war began and looked up at skies that were finally free of alien ships. The sight of blue sky and white clouds seemed almost impossible after months of living beneath the earth like some primitive ancestor. But the war was not over yet, and Stone had work to finish. The global counteroffensive began within hours of Nick Johnson's successful attack on the Dominion. Human fighters who had been hiding in tunnels and ruins for over a year poured out of their sanctuaries like an avenging flood. They had learned patience and cunning during the long months of occupation, and now they put those lessons to savage use. Sarah Mitchell led her Chicago fighters in a systematic assault on every alien installation in the city. Her people moved through the streets they knew better than any invader could and struck with the fury of those who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. The aliens who had hunted them for so long now found themselves the prey. The Calith tried to establish defensive positions, but their rigid military doctrine proved useless against human fighters who refused to follow any predictable pattern. Every ambush was different. Every attack came from an unexpected direction. The aliens had been programmed to fight conventional wars against conventional enemies, but humans were neither conventional nor predictable. Colonel Beth Morgan coordinated attacks across the Phoenix network as resistance cells struck simultaneously at targets thousands of miles apart. The aliens could not respond to all the attacks at once, and their inability to communicate effectively left individual units fighting isolated battles they could not win. Captain Steve Miller brought his trained fighters down from their mountain camps to join the urban warfare raging in cities around the world. His people had been learning to kill aliens for over a year, and they were very good at their job. They showed no mercy because they had received none, and they remembered every friend who had died at alien hands. Mayor Tony Clark led his Detroit underground out of the subway tunnels and into the daylight for the first time since the invasion. His people had been preparing for this moment for months, and they moved through the city with the efficiency of those who had planned every step of their revenge. The aliens had destroyed their world, but humans were about to return the favor. The few alien commanders still capable of independent thought attempted to negotiate surrender terms, but humanity's response shocked them more than any military defeat could have. The humans rejected all offers of negotiation and demanded unconditional surrender. There would be no terms and no mercy for those who had planned genocide. President Lisa Carter addressed the world from the rebuilt White House as human forces completed their liberation of Earth, but her speech was broadcast beyond Earth using captured alien communication networks. She spoke to the entire galaxy, and her message was simple. Any species that threatened humanity would face the same savage response that had destroyed the supposedly invincible Caliph Empire. Dr. Helen Park led teams of scientists in studying captured alien technology, but with a distinctly human approach. Where the aliens had built weapons of conquest, humans created tools of liberation. The technology that had been used to enslave worlds would now be turned toward freeing them from the Caliph Empire. Engineer Kelly Adams designed humanity's first interstellar warships using hybrid human and alien technology. The ships combined alien power systems with human weapons and human unpredictability. They were built not for conquest but for liberation, and they would carry human fighters to every world the Caliph had enslaved. Admiral Ryan Brooks stood on the bridge of the newly commissioned EDS Retribution and looked out at the fleet of liberation ships preparing for their first mission. Each vessel carried volunteers who had survived the occupation and chosen to risk their lives freeing other worlds from alien tyranny. They were no longer defending Earth but carrying war to their enemies. The nearest Caliph slave world was only 12 light years away and had been under alien control for over a century. The human fleet would arrive without warning and without mercy. They had learned from their enemies that conquest required absolute commitment, but unlike the Caliph, they fought for freedom rather than slavery. Amy Rodriguez intercepted the final communications from the Caliph High Command as news of Earth's liberation spread through their empire. Panic was spreading through worlds that had never known defeat as subject species realized that resistance was possible. The human example was inspiring rebellion across the galaxy. High Overlord Zethkar died in the ruins of his command ship, still unable to understand how primitive humans had defeated his perfect war machine. His last thoughts were not of strategy or tactics, but of the terrible realization that his species had awakened something in humanity that would never sleep again. Dr. Kevin Wright studied the psychological profiles of captured Caliph soldiers and found that they were incapable of understanding human motivation. They had been bred to follow orders and could not comprehend creatures who fought not because they were commanded to do so, but because they chose to defend their freedom. The war crimes trials began 6 months after Earth's liberation, but they were brief affairs. Humans had learned that some crimes could not be forgiven and some enemies could not be allowed to survive. The galaxy needed to understand that threatening humanity carried consequences that lasted forever. 5 years later, Admiral Sarah Mitchell commanded the Liberation Fleet as it prepared to respond to a distress call from a newly discovered species, facing extinction at the hands of another galactic empire. Her response to the threatened aliens was broadcast across known space and became known as the Human Doctrine. She told them that help was coming, and that Earth remembered what it felt like to face extinction. Humanity had decided that no other species should suffer that fate, and they were prepared to enforce that decision with the same savage determination that had freed Earth from the Caliph. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat. They had proven that any species could be conquered, but only if they chose to surrender. Humans had made a different choice, and that choice had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Caliph Empire was gone, but its legacy lived on in the 847 worlds that human fleets were systematically liberating. Each freed planet became a beacon of hope for oppressed species throughout the galaxy and a reminder that freedom was worth any price. The universe now knew that humans did not just fight to survive, but fought to win, and they never forgot those who threatened their freedom. The age of easy conquest was over, and the age of human liberation had begun.